A show of strength by Germany's far-right angry protests after the killing of a young man, foreigners accused of his death. Is anti-migrant sentiment growing in Germany? And how much of a threat does it pose? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashim Ahalbarra. The city of Chemnitz in the East German state of Saxony has seen a series of violent anti-migrant protests. They began last Sunday after the fatal stabbing of a 35-year-old German man and the arrest of two suspects, asylum seekers from Iraq and Syria. The streets were briefly owned by far-right protesters who chanted "Germany for Germans," reportedly gave Hitler salutes and chased anyone who looked foreign. Police struggled to keep control and fights continued the following day between far-right and left-wing demonstrators. The violence has raised concerns about in the city's neo-Nazi stronghold, exposing divisions in German society about immigration. Chancellor Angela Merkel allowed more than 1 million migrants into the country at the height of the refugee crisis in 2015. The biggest opposition party, the far-right Alternative for Germany, seized on what it saw as an open-door policy, winning 92 parliamentary seats in last year's elections. And the AfD organized another protest on Saturday. Dominic Kane has been in Chemnitz and filed this report.
Their message is loud and it is clear. They are the people whom their country has forgotten. Neglected, so they say, by a government that encourages tolerance and integration. On Thursday, they took to the streets of Chemnitz to oppose a meeting of solidarity between the main parties taking place nearby. And to highlight their distrust of mainstream media. Perhaps around 1,000 people were here, protesting against the numbers of migrants in Chemnitz. In fact, official figures show only around 1.5% of the population here is from Syria and Afghanistan. This demonstration was peaceful, in stark contrast to the scenes on Sunday and Monday when thousands of far-right and far-left protesters threw rocks, bottles and fireworks at each other and at the police. The violence flowed from the events on Sunday morning when a German national was fatally stabbed during an altercation with two migrants. In the wake of that, many people wondered if there'd been collusion between elements of the far right and someone in the judicial system. On Thursday, an official admitted to having leaked the details of the suspects. He has been suspended. On a wider level, this week many Germans have been wondering at the strength of the far right in Saxony. One local analyst explained how their approach has shifted.
They use Facebook and Twitter, and if this should not suffice, they do telephone calls and they say, well, something ugly has been happening here. We have to show that we do not agree with that, and we have to make clear that there is many of us.
The people here speak with a loud voice and seemingly a united voice, but their numbers across Germany remain very small. But their message certainly is being heard across this country.
The challenge for the political elite is what they will do about it. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, Chemnitz.
Let's bring in our panelists. In Berlin, Philip Sauter, a student activist and anti-fascism campaigner. In Washington, Cynthia Miller-Idris, professor of education sociology at the American University. And also in Berlin, Mona El-Omari, political activist and community educator. Welcome to the program. Philip, quite interesting to see what's happening in Chemnitz. So a young German was killed and then the streets were almost taken over by the far right. Is this a genuine act of anger over what people think is lack of security, or is it an act of political opportunism by the German far right?
Well, by the far right, it's of course an act of opportunity. They got the opportunity that one person was killed on the street. And yes, we don't know anything about the accident itself. We know that one person was killed. We know that we have 2 suspects. And yeah, that's it. And at the same time, right-wing activists use this opportunity to get on the street, to overwhelm the police, and yeah, to be the majority for a short time.
Cynthia, we have people in Chemnitz saying basically they no longer feel protected by the state. What does this tale tell us about Germany?
I think part of what we're seeing is that, political parties that are closer to the mainstream, that are officially in parliament now, and rhetoric has officially and successfully been mobilized to stoke fear in ordinary people that is far, exaggerated. They're not protesting, ordinary crimes that Germans are doing, which are, also just as likely to produce the kind of violence that you're seeing that we saw in that terrible tragedy on Sunday. But it's an opportunity for the far right to mobilize and to come together and use it as an excuse to enact violence.
Mm-hmm. Mona, we've seen fearmongers across Europe tapping into the general anxiety about the influx of immigrants into the country to advance a political agenda. Is this an isolated act of fear-mongering in Germany, or is it an event that could build up in the future?
I actually do not think that this is an isolated event. I think that it is one incident in a chain of incidents that has been happening, that will happen in the future. I think we haven't seen the last of it yet. I think what has happened over the last decades even is yet another shift of the overall societal discourse to the right. And that entails that things that might not have happened in the frequency that they have now are finding a climate in which they can happen, and the perpetrators of certain acts do not have to fear the same repercussions that maybe they would have had 20 years ago.
Philip, one of the pivotal moments of the events that are unfolding in Chemnitz is basically the investigation into the leaking of the arrest warrant by the police to the far right. Does it give us any sort of indication about some sort of collaboration or link between the police and the far right in Chemnitz?
I would not say that there is collaboration with the police, between police and right-wing extremists on a large scale. What we know is that certain elements in the police are sympathizing with right-wing extremism. Maybe not the right-wing neo-Nazi parties, but at least with the AfD party. And the other point is that the right-wing extremists overwhelmed the police. They claim to be, on the one side, to be part of German society and admiring the police. On the other side, they clash with the police. Now we know from the past, there was recently an event where a camera team was pushed away from a demonstration by police. And they were accused by one man, one normal demonstrator, of being people who make propaganda. He was, it turns out, also a policeman in civil clothes, not in service, but in an administration position inside the police. And this, of course, showed also that there are some connections between police and right-wing extremists, at least on a level of not cooperation, but on sympathy. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Cynthia, I mean, if you see the latest developments, we've basically seen protesters acting like vigilantes, shouting anti-democracy slogans, saying they are opposed to the mainstream media, shouting that Germany should stay for the Germans. Where does it lead Germany?
I think that one of the things that Germany has to reckon with is this shift in the tactics of the far right that Chemnitz represented and revealed, which is that there's a very rapid mobilization that can happen. And while, yes, this is a trajectory that's been happening over a couple of decades, I agree with that. I think there was still something different here in that we saw a kind of a coalition emerge among violent right-wing extremists, the mixed martial arts, the soccer hooligans, everyone coming into the street, not in just small groups, combined with large numbers of kind of ordinary people who were mobilized. And that, I think, is a newer development to see that many people so quickly activated over social media. And I think that's something that certainly in the future, the intelligence services and the police have to reckon with that rapid mobilization and be better prepared.
Muna, this isn't the first time that the observers, the local media is talking about what should the police do to tackle the rise of extremism in Germany. Remember the 15 years ago and the series of attacks targeting migrants. Police said these were completely isolated. It took us 15 years, at least for the German government, to say this is something that is connected to the National Social Underground, which is a neo-Nazi movement. Are we talking about some sort of laxism by the security apparatus in Germany?
Yeah, I would definitely call it a lack of response by the German police force. I think what people have to remember in discussing the role of the police force and also the role of intelligence agencies in Germany is the fact that after Germany became a state kind of in its own right again after the Second World War, a lot of former high-function figures of the Nazi Party were basically reinstated into their old functions, whether it was the legal force like lawyers and judges, or whether it was the police force or intelligence agencies. So from the moment of their being brought into existence, these institutions have been basically run by former neo-Nazi or Nazi Party members. And I'm sure not only me, but a lot of people actually think that these former roles that they played under Nazi rule and their convictions were actually traded into or embedded into the new institutions as well. And there have been a lot of, or at least in my opinion, there have been too many scandals of right-wing or right-leaning or racist members of the police force to just have them be single incidents or the proverbial bad apple in the bunch. I actually do think that there's a huge and very important problem of racism within the German police force and within the German intelligence agencies.
Philip, we're talking here about different political parties or organizations with different affiliations with the far right, like the National Social Underground, Pegida, which is the patriotic Europeans against the Islamization of the West, the AfD, which is the third largest political party in the Bundestag, and the National Democratic Party. Is the far right becoming now a mainstream establishment in Germany?
Well, I would say it's not becoming a mainstream establishment, but it reached the mainstream. Or to formulate it a little bit different, it has been always in the mainstream, but it's becoming more openly now. The problem with these organizations is that they have very different kind of agendas, but in the end, they are all right-wing and very much extreme and radical. And but they have different kind of shadows regarding that, you know. Some of them try to get more into the public. Some of them try to be more extreme or more violent. Some of them are even terrorist organizations, like you mentioned it, the Nationalist Socialist Underground, like they call themselves. And yeah, so it's not becoming mainstream. The mainstream, the majority of people, in my opinion, still is not very much affected by especially the extreme right. But they get into this populism, of course, of especially the AfD, and this, of course, gives people also other people otherwise also join other more extreme parties after that. So all of them get, of course, more people. Yeah.
Cynthia, with the AfD, which is the Alternative for Germany, becoming the third biggest political party in the country, it has a platform, it sets the agenda, it's all the time linking the problems of Germany to the coming of the immigrants. Is this a party that you think could, in the near future, further deepen the crisis in Germany?
I absolutely think that part of the problem is the political rhetoric that comes from political parties like the AfD, but also globally from other far-right and populist leaders that is anti-immigrant and anti-Islam. And when ordinary people who might kind of privately hold racist opinions start to see that validation and legitimation of anti-immigrant, anti-Islam, Islamophobic, and racist sentiments coming from political leaders, they feel empowered. And I think that gets amplified then over social media and the way in which people can kind of share racist thoughts that they might not have shared prior to this kind of online space. So I think that's part of what we're seeing here, is that back and forth of legitimation and activation.
Mona, how do you respond to those who would say that this is not something which is particular about Germany, because those who won the elections against the backdrop of xenophobic, anti-migrant narrative, won elections brought Trump to the US, allowed for the Brexit to happen, and are now behind the spectacular rise of the populist movement in Europe?
Yes, I wouldn't say that it's... let's put it that way. I would agree with those who say that these developments are not particular for Germany, not for Europe, and maybe not even for North America, because from my point of view, from that point of analysis, one has to say that racism in itself is a constitutive element of our nation-state building, of how our societies, as in the Western world, of how our societies run. So racism, as part and parcel of, capitalist, nationalist societies or nation states, has to be addressed in order to be able to address all those more extreme, more violent consequences that we see from these kinds of societal structures still being at play. And I think that the solutions that need to be found, should lie in listening to the people who have been warning against a re-strengthening of the far right for years and years, which is mostly people of color organizations, Black German organizations, Jewish organizations, all the LGBTQI organizations, all those groups of people and groups in society that have been minorities for such a long time and have been experiencing violence on a personal and institutional level way before Chemnitz happened, way before Rostock-Lichtenhagen happened, way before Mölln, Solingen, and Hoyerswerda happened. So I think what needs to happen would have to be basically a very, let's say, radical shift in how society is structured.
Philip, where does this leave the governing coalition in Germany?
Well, the ruling coalition, yes. The problem is the protesters, the right-wing extremists, they have one picture of an enemy, and this is Angela Merkel. And of course, she is in a position now that she has to reject that she has to react on it as well. And this is exactly what they want. They want Angela Merkel to be a person in the public. They want to have her making remarks that nobody likes, actually, making a head of state. And yes, and in the end, they don't really care about that. They want to establish all their things in the population. And I think right now the politics, it's not touching so much. These events were already used by one minister who appeared there, who was talking publicly. And yes, that's it pretty much. Otherwise, many politicians in Germany, of course, call for counter demonstrations, for showing the real society and not the right wing.
The real face of Germany. Cynthia, I mean, here is the dilemma for Angela Merkel. The governing coalition knows that its poll ratings are declining, and therefore you can easily detect that they are moving towards the right. And this could explain why they are not really being aggressive when it comes to what's happening now in Chemnitz.
I think that part of what's happening is that, the governing coalition, Angela Merkel, have to continue to assert what values Germany stands for and continue to fight against it and speak out more strongly rather than have a muted response. I think that there is still a majority of Germans, obviously, who stand very strongly against this. But I think, one of the things I want to add is that I think while, yes, I totally agree with Muna that it's important to listen to people of color and to people who are being victimized, I also think we have to, from within the governing coalition and within the leadership of education systems, listen to people who are being activated on the streets. What is it that they're responding to? Because I think this anti-immigrant sentiment is activating some other kind of deeper emotional ideas about who belongs in the nation. And those conversations have to start happening at the highest level if we're going to actually address why people are interested in participating.
Muna, with the far right building momentum in the eastern part of the country, which has become some sort of a stronghold for them, could we say that the far right is likely to undermine the basic tenets of what has been a liberal, inclusive society for more than 5 decades?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. When we call Germany a liberal, inclusive society, then, of course, we will find cases and evidence that indeed Germany has certain progressive laws and has certain progressive opinions that are represented in mainstream society. But at the same time, on the other hand, there still have been lots of legislation and laws and societal opinions that are far less than inclusive and liberal. There have been university institutions and universities, researchers, academics who have been following German society sentiments for decades in longitudinal studies, and they have found that a very stable percentage of the German society either holds or strongly holds views that would have to be called deeply anti-liberal, very traditionalist, very conservative, and not in the good way conservative, right into the area of far right.
Philip, this is going to be my last question, please, in less than a minute. Do you think that with Merkel facing problems with the open door policy, her last chance could be improving the economy?
Well, the German economy is actually very good. And also, even in Chemnitz, the economy is not so bad. Of course, there's a high percentage of unemployment, but in recent years, it improved quite a lot. And yeah, of course, economic development is very important. In recent years, the economy got not too bad. And of course, economic development is very important. But on the other hand, it is not just the economy. It is these resentments are in the general population.
Thank you.
Resentments against migrants. More in the East and less in the West. This has to be addressed very much by politicians and as well as civil society as a whole. Every single person is responsible for such kind of behavior in the end and has to fight such kind of racism.
Philip Sauter, Cynthia Miller-Idris, Muna El Omari, thank you very much indeed for being on the program. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashim Ahalbara, the whole team here. Bye for now.